I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative Ambassador of Sri Lanka.
Mr. President, let me congratulate you on your successful stewardship towards holding the very first session of the International Migration Review Forum. Mr. President, we are at a time when the world is facing new challenges in an environment of belligerent human activity and of climate change, which undeniably results in displacement that compels persons to migrate to safer territory. Even though the Resolution 73/326 regarding the structuring of the IMRF was adopted in 2019 prior to the pandemic, we believe that the adoption of the resolution could not have been more timely. The Progress Declaration to be adopted at this forum, structured upon that resolution, we believe, would define the trajectory in which the migration agenda would traverse in the future. We observed that as many as 281 million people were international migrants in 2020 globally, of whom 48% were women and girls and 15% were under the age of 20. In this context, an increased number of migrants, especially women and children, are facing greater hardship every year. In addressing these issues faced by the people in such vulnerable circumstances, condemning all forms of racial discrimination, xenophobia and related intolerance, modern-day slavery, as I call it, faced by migrants, should be given very high priority by this forum. My dear friends, there cannot be a compromise on the dignity of the humankind. It is not a commercial commodity that can be traded on the altar of economic expediency or for reasons of good international relations. Migrants should not be considered as a charitable activity. It was coincidentally the Holy Father, the Pope Francis, who recently in his message in the World Day of Migrants proclaimed that he reaffirms our shared response by articulating 4 verbs in the treatment of migrants, namely to welcome, to protect, to promote, and to integrate. He says, welcome migrants, he says, by offering them broad options for migrants to seek admission to destination countries safely and legally. Protect them, he says, by procedures intended to defend their rights and dignity, independent of their legal status, offer them freedom of work. Promote, he says, migration by essential means to enable them their potential as human beings in all dimensions, as members of the human family. He says, facilitate migration and their integration by providing opportunities for intercultural enrichment, which they bring with them without an assimilation that leads to migrants to forget their own cultural identity. Sri Lanka witnessed a growth of 126.8% of the departures for foreign employment in the last year. The male and female departures for the year for foreign employment stood at 66.2% and 33.8% respectively. With a view to eliminating the possible risks of vulnerabilities involved with regard to these migrants, Sri Lanka adhered to a number of measures, which included creating awareness amongst migrants of the benefits of using regular channels. Sri Lanka established a national GCM implementation committee in December of 2021, co-convened by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the State Ministry of Foreign Employment Promotion and Market Diversification, with a view to developing a national GCM implementation plan. Distinguished delegates, Sri Lanka strongly believes that the achievement of both GCM objectives and the SDGs is realized through the formulation of a sound migration policy. In this context, we are of the view that when developing a national GCM implementation plan for Sri Lanka, the identified GCM objectives, priorities need to complement national SDG targets. It is our understanding that Objective 4 of the GCM makes it incumbent on the sending state to ensure that all migrants have a legal identity and adequate documentation. My dear friends, to those who have resources and to the development nations, I can only re-echo the words of President Kennedy when he said that immigration policy should be generous, it should be fair, it should be flexible. And he says, with such a policy, he said, we can turn to the world and to our own past with clean hands and a clear conscience. Distinguished delegates, I ask the question, can we? Think about it. Let us therefore pledge that as we leave these hallowed portals of this assembly, we will make that change that will make a difference. Let me conclude by reminding ourselves of a very apt quotation by the American poet and human rights activist Brant McGill, which I believe we can take away as one that will nourish our own ethos in our approach to migration and migrants. Quote, when you give others a new chance is really being given to you. And that is to you and I and to each one of us. Think about it. I thank you, Mr. President.
Muchas gracias.
I thank the distinguished ambassador of Sri Lanka. I now give the